I've always loved driving at night. Something about it feels peaceful. The empty roads, the quiet hum of the engine, the way the world seems smaller when it's just you and the dark highway stretching ahead. I've done countless long drives, cross-country trips, late-night runs through empty interstates, even back roads that most people avoid. I've never been scared of the road before, but that changed on one night. And now I don't drive at night anymore. It started as a simple trip. A long one, sure, but nothing I hadn't done before. I was driving home after visiting a friend who lived about 10 hours away. I left later than I planned, around 8 p.m., but I didn't mind. It meant I'd be driving through the night, but I had good music, coffee, and the open road ahead of me. For the first few hours, everything was normal. The highway was mostly empty. A few scattered cars, the occasional semi-truck, but for the most part, it was just me and the road. The sky was clear, the air cool, and the drive felt easy. Around midnight, I pulled off at a gas station in a small town to fill up. The place was nearly deserted. One lone car parked near the convenience store, but I didn't see anyone inside. The only sound was the buzzing of the old fluorescent lights above the pumps. I filled my tank, stretched my legs, and got back on the road. That's when things started to feel off. About 30 minutes after leaving the gas station, I noticed a car behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was a two-lane highway, nothing unusual about another car on the road. But after a few minutes, I realized something. It wasn't passing me. It wasn't falling back either. It was just there, matching my speed. I sped up a little. Nothing crazy, just enough to see if they'd do the same. They did. A little unease crept into my stomach. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe they were heading the same way. Still, I didn't like it. I switched lanes. The car did too. I slowed down. So did they. I couldn't see the driver, just the headlights in my mirror, glaring bright in the dark. I told myself not to panic. There were exits coming up. Towns, places with people. I'd lose them there. I took the next exit. It wasn't a big town, just a tiny collection of buildings, mostly closed for the night. A diner with flickering neon lights, a darkened gas station, a couple of houses set back from the road. I turned onto a side street, then onto another, trying to put some distance between me and the car. For a moment, I thought I'd lost them. Then, headlights, turning onto the same street, following. I felt a surge of cold panic. This wasn't random. Whoever was in that car was following me. I needed to get back to the highway. I turned sharply onto another road, faster now, tires skidding slightly on the pavement. The car behind me sped up too. I took another turn, dead end. A single streetlight flickered above an empty lot. No houses, no businesses, no way out. And the car behind me is slowed to a stop, just far enough back that I couldn't see inside. I sat there, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The car didn't move, just sat there, waiting. Then, the driver's side door opened. I didn't wait. I threw my car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed out of the dead-end street. The figure barely had time to react before I whipped the wheel and sped off, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't look back. I blew through a stop sign, nearly lost control on a sharp curve, but I didn't care. I needed to get away. I saw the on-ramp ahead and gunned it. Back onto the highway, back to safety. For a few minutes, I thought I was in the clear. Then, headlights. In my mirror, they were back. And this time, they weren't keeping their distance. They were speeding up, coming for me. I've never driven so fast in my life. I was pushing 90, 100 miles per hour, gripping the wheel so tight my hands ached. The road was empty, stretching ahead like an endless tunnel of darkness. But the car behind me, they weren't backing off. They were keeping up, tailgating, swerving, trying to force me off the road. I couldn't call for help, no service out here, no way to reach anyone. I had to lose them. Up ahead, I saw an exit. No town signs, no lights, just a narrow off-ramp leading into the trees. I took it, too fast. My tires screeched as I barely made the turn, my car fishtailing before I got control again. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept driving. The road was rough, winding through dense forest, barely wide enough for 2 cars. And the other car? Still behind me, still coming. The road twisted sharply. I saw it too late. I yanked the wheel, my car skidding sideways, nearly spinning out before I regained control. But the car behind me? They weren't so lucky. They hit the turn too fast. Their tires screeched. Their headlights swung wildly. Then, gone. Just like that. 1 second they were there. The next, nothing. I slowed down, breath ragged, hands shaking. I didn't stop. I didn't check. I just kept driving. I made it home just before dawn. Parked in my driveway and just sat there, hands gripping the wheel, staring at my reflection in the windshield. I checked the news the next day. Nothing. No reports of accidents. No missing persons. No mention of a car found wrecked in the woods. It was like they had never existed. I don't know who was in that car. I don't know what they wanted. But I know this. I don't drive at night anymore. I've always liked long drives. There's something calming about being alone on the road. Just the hum of the engine and the lines on the pavement stretching endlessly ahead. I've done dozens of long solo trips before, cross-country drives, late-night highway runs, winding back roads through the middle of nowhere. I never really felt scared out there, until one night. And now I don't drive alone anymore. It was a late October evening when I left my friend's house. I had been visiting for the weekend, and the drive home was a little over 6 hours. I hadn't planned on leaving that late, but time slipped away, and by the time I pulled onto the highway, the sun had already dipped below the horizon. It didn't bother me, though. I had a full tank of gas, a playlist of my favorite songs, and a cup of coffee to keep me awake. For the first couple of hours, everything was normal. The highway was quiet but not empty. A few cars here and there, some distant headlights in my rearview mirror. I settled into the drive, my mind drifting between thoughts, my hands relaxed on the wheel. Then, somewhere around 11 p.m., I noticed something strange. A car. Not just any car. A set of headlights that had been behind me for a little too long. At first, I didn't think much of it. It's normal to have another car on the road, even late at night. But after 30 minutes, the headlights were still there. Not passing me, not falling back, just there. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe they were just heading the same way. Maybe I was overthinking it. Still, a small feeling of unease settled in my chest. I changed lanes. So did they. I sped up. So did they. That's when I knew something wasn't right. I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself it was a coincidence. But the longer they stayed behind me, the harder it was to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. I decided to test them. There was an exit coming up. A small town, just a cluster of gas stations and motels off the highway. I didn't need to stop, but I took the exit anyway, hoping they'd keep going. They didn't. They followed me. I took a random turn onto a side street. So did they. I turned again. So did they. That's when the fear really hit. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone was following me. I kept driving, trying to stay calm, my hands gripping the wheel a little tighter now. The town was small and mostly asleep. A few dimly lit signs, a closed diner, an empty gas station. No traffic, no people. I turned onto another road, hoping to lose them. But they stayed behind me, always at the same distance, never too close, never too far. I didn't know what to do. If I pulled into a parking lot and stopped, would they stop too? If I tried to go back to the highway, would they follow me for the rest of the drive? I made another turn. A mistake. Dead end. A small lot behind an abandoned building, overgrown with weeds, one flickering streetlight above. I hit the brakes. My breath caught in my throat as their headlights slowly pulled in behind me. And then, their car stopped. Neither of us moved. I could feel my heart pounding, the silence thick and suffocating. Then, after what felt like an eternity, their driver's side door opened. I didn't wait to see who they were. I threw my car into reverse, my tires screeching against the pavement. The figure had barely stepped out of their car before I was speeding backward, whipping the wheel to turn myself around. I slammed the gas, my car lurching forward, the headlights of their vehicle shrinking in my rearview mirror as I tore back toward the main road. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just drove, heart hammering, adrenaline flooding my veins, every instinct in me screaming to get the hell out of there. It took me nearly 5 minutes to calm down enough to check my mirrors. No headlights, no sign of them. They were gone. I told myself I was safe now, back on the highway, back on the open road. But just as I started to relax, just as my pulse began to slow, I saw it, far behind me, headlights, the same ones, getting closer. I hit the gas. The speed limit was 65, but I pushed past 80, then 90. My hands were slick with sweat, my breaths coming short and fast. But no matter how fast I went, they kept up. For miles, they tailed me, never getting too close, never falling too far behind. I had no cell service, no exits nearby, just endless dark highway. I had to lose them. Up ahead, I saw an old service road, barely visible in the dark. I took it, hard. My car jolted as I sped onto the narrow, cracked pavement, dust and gravel kicking up behind me. The road twisted sharply through a dense forest, barely wide enough for 2 cars. I stole a glance in my mirror. They had followed, but they were struggling now. The road was rough, uneven. Their headlights swerved wildly, their car bouncing as they tried to keep up. And then, a turn. I made it, barely. They didn't. Their headlights veered hard to the side, then disappeared. A loud crash echoed through the trees, then silence. I didn't stop. I kept driving until I hit a real road again, until I found a gas station with lights and people. My hands were shaking when I finally pulled over. I sat there for a long time, breathing hard, staring at my reflection in the windshield. I never found out who they were. I checked the news the next day, nothing. No reports of accidents, no missing person alerts. It was like they never existed. But I know what I saw, and I know one thing for sure. I'll never drive alone at night again. The road stretched out ahead of me, empty and endless, cutting through miles of flat, barren land. I had been driving for hours, and the weight of exhaustion pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. The highway was quiet, too quiet. No streetlights, no other cars. Just the hum of my tires against the pavement and the occasional flicker of my high beams bouncing off reflective signs. I checked the time on the dashboard. 2:04 a.m. I should have stopped hours ago, but I wanted to push through, get home, crawl into my own bed. I hated sleeping in strange places, waking up to unfamiliar ceilings. I had done long drives before, but something about tonight felt different. The gas gauge hovered just above a quarter tank. I knew I needed to stop soon. My phone sat on the passenger seat, screen dark. I picked it up and tapped the screen. No signal. Not surprising. I was deep in the middle of nowhere, miles from the last small town I had passed. The road kept going, disappearing into the darkness ahead. A long, straight stretch with nothing but occasional patches of dried grass along the shoulder. I hadn't seen another car in nearly an hour. Then I saw the lights. Up ahead, on the side of the road, a set of hazard lights blinked in the dark. Car pulled over. A black sedan, old but well-kept. The trunk was open, but I couldn't see anyone standing near it. As I got closer, I slowed down just a little. My headlights washed over the car. The driver's side door was wide open. No one inside. A cold feeling crawled up my spine. I drove past, glancing in the rearview mirror. The hazards continued to blink, but there was still no sign of anyone. Something felt wrong. A few miles down the road, the uneasy feeling refused to leave me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that maybe the driver had walked to find help. But where? There was nothing out here, just empty road and darkness. The further I drove, the heavier the silence became. No signs, no exits. The last gas station I passed had been nearly 50 miles back. Then, my headlights caught something. A shape just ahead, in the middle of the road. A deer, I thought, but as I got closer, my stomach dropped. It was a person, standing right in the center of the highway. I slammed the brakes. My car skidded, tires screeching against the pavement. My heart pounded as I gripped the wheel, trying to steady the car. The person didn't move. I stopped just feet away, my headlights shining directly on them. A man, tall, wearing dark clothes. His face was in shadow, his head slightly tilted, as if he was listening. I felt frozen, my breath caught in my throat. Then he took a step toward me. Panic surged through my veins. I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning as I backed away. He kept walking, slow, deliberate. Then he stopped. For a long moment, he just stood there, watching me. Then he turned and walked off the road. Not hurried, not running, just walking. He disappeared into the tall grass on the side of the road, swallowed by the darkness. I didn't wait. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped off, hands shaking on the wheel. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. What the hell had just happened? I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see him running after me, but there was nothing, just the empty road stretching behind me. I needed to get out of here, find a gas station, a motel, anything. I gripped the wheel tighter, forcing myself to focus. I just had to keep driving. Minutes passed, then miles. The road remained empty, the darkness pressing in on all sides, and then headlights. In my rearview mirror, a pair of lights appeared in the distance. My pulse spiked. It was far back, but I could see it clearly. A black sedan. My stomach twisted. I pressed the gas. The car behind me did the same. I was doing 85 now. The sedan stayed right behind me. I felt trapped. There was nowhere to go. No exits, no turnoffs, just miles of open road. Then my headlights hit something up ahead. I barely had time to react. Another car pulled over on the side of the road. My blood ran cold. It was the same black sedan. I looked in my rearview mirror. The car behind me was gone. I turned back to the road, gripping the wheel so hard my fingers ached. My mind raced. This wasn't possible. There was no way. I needed to stop, get my bearings, think. Up ahead, a blue sign loomed in the darkness. Rest area 2 miles. I had no choice. The exit appeared, and I took it without hesitation, tires screeching as I pulled into the lot. The rest stop was small. A single building, vending machines, a row of bathrooms. A couple of cars parked near the edge of the lot. No people. I pulled into a spot near the entrance and cut the engine. My hands were still shaking. I sat there trying to slow my breathing. Then movement. In my mirror, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the lot. The man from the road. Couldn't breathe. He was just standing there, not moving, not coming closer, just watching. Then he smiled. A slow, deliberate smile. I started my car and got the hell out of there. I didn't stop again until I reached the lights of a town an hour later. I pulled into a crowded diner parking lot and just sat there, my body still shaking, my mind racing. I didn't know what had happened back there. I didn't want to know. All I knew was that I was never taking that road again. It had been a long day. I had spent most of it working in the city, dealing with clients, meetings, and the usual mess of life that comes with it. By the time the sun had begun setting, I was ready to leave, head home, and unwind in the peace and quiet of my apartment. The only problem? It was going to be a long drive. The weather had been fine that day, but as evening approached, the skies started to change. Dark clouds rolled in, casting an ominous shadow over the city. By the time I was on the road, the storm had started. It was just light rain at first, nothing I hadn't driven through before. But as I left the bustling city behind and entered the more remote, rural roads, the rain picked up, hard and heavy, the kind that makes it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. I had taken this route dozens of times before. It wasn't the fastest way to get home, but I enjoyed the solitude of the back roads. There were fewer cars, no traffic lights, just miles and miles of winding, empty roads that cut through dense forests. The smell of the wet earth and trees was almost comforting, and the steady rhythm of the rain on the roof of the car made it feel like I was the only one alive in the world. a peace that always settled over me during these drives. But tonight, something felt off. At first, I couldn't place it. It was just a small nagging feeling, the kind of thing that you try to ignore when you're tired. The windshield wipers were working overtime, struggling to clear the thick sheets of rain. Every now and then, a loud thud would hit the roof of the car, the rain growing heavier, accompanied by bursts of wind that caused the trees on the roadside to sway violently. I pulled the rearview mirror down, glancing behind me. The road stretched out in the distance, empty. No other cars, no headlights. I was alone out here, which was the way I liked it. The headlights from my car illuminated the slick, wet pavement, casting long, eerie shadows in the rain. I reached over to adjust the radio, trying to distract myself from the creeping feeling in my stomach. The static was unbearable, so I switched it off and focused on the road ahead. There were no streetlights here, no signs of civilization, just endless trees on either side of the road, their branches reaching out like twisted arms, almost as if trying to grab the car. The road seemed to be getting narrower, and the rain seemed to make it feel even more isolating. I knew the area well. This stretch of highway had always felt remote, but tonight, it felt as though it were closing in on me. I shook off the unease, trying to focus on the road. I wasn't sure what it was, but my body was on edge. Maybe it was the storm, the darkening sky, or maybe it was the exhaustion from the long day. Either way, I didn't like it. The car ahead of me was small, too small to be anything that would cause concern. Yet the sight of its tail lights flickering in the distance gave me a brief sense of relief. Maybe I wasn't so alone after all. Maybe I'd get to the next town soon, and everything would feel normal again. But as I closed the distance between my car and the one ahead, something strange happened. The car's taillights blinked once, just once, then disappeared. I stared at the empty stretch of road in front of me, heart starting to pound. It was as if the car had vanished into thin air. I slowed down, thinking I'd missed a turn or something, but there was no other road, just the endless, rain-soaked highway stretching on ahead of me. No other vehicles, no lights, just me and the wet road. I checked the rearview mirror again. Nothing. No headlights, no cars behind me. Only my own reflection and the dark stretch of the road behind me. I felt a wave of discomfort wash over me, but I brushed it off. Maybe the car had pulled over somewhere, or maybe it had taken an exit I hadn't noticed. Either way, there was nothing for me to worry about. But as I continued driving, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The rain was still pouring, the windshield wipers doing their best to keep up, but the fog was getting thicker, drifting across the road like smoke. The air felt colder, heavier. I pulled my jacket tighter around my shoulders, trying to ward off the chill. That's when I noticed it. In the rearview mirror, I saw something I didn't notice before. A figure, person, standing in the middle of the road. My heart nearly stopped. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding on the slick pavement. The car came to a screeching halt just a few feet away from the figure, who remained motionless in the dark, rain-soaked road. I stared, wide-eyed, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. The figure was tall, but I couldn't make out any distinguishing features. They were drenched, their clothes clinging to their body, but they didn't seem to be moving, didn't seem to acknowledge the car in front of them. Panic flooded my chest, but I wasn't about to just drive away. The last thing I wanted was to hit someone in the middle of the road, no matter how strange the situation seemed. "Hello," I whispered, though I knew there was no way the person would hear me over the sound of the storm. Nothing, no movement, no sign of life, just that figure standing there, motionless. I hesitated. Should I get out and check? Should I honk the horn? My mind raced with all the things that could go wrong. But as I sat there, frozen, the figure suddenly took a step forward, slowly. A jolt of panic ran through me. Without thinking, I threw the car into reverse and sped backward, my heart in my throat as I looked behind me. The car swerved, and I slammed the brakes again, just narrowly avoiding crashing into the guardrail. I whipped my head back around, heart pounding in my chest. The figure was gone, just gone. I sat there in disbelief, staring into the rain-slick road ahead. There was no sign of them, No footprints, no nothing, as if they had just evaporated into the fog. The tension in my body loosened slightly, though the unease lingered. I slowly pressed the accelerator, my eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. I didn't dare to look back again. Whatever that was, it was too unsettling to dwell on. But as I continued down the road, things didn't improve. The storm was intensifying now, the rain coming down in sheets. The fog made it even harder to see, and I found myself slowing down, straining to see what was ahead. The headlights barely cut through the thick mist. And then it happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement again. The figure. They were back, standing at the edge of the road, watching me. I almost swerved off the road, panic gripping me. I fought to steady the car, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I looked at the figure. They were still motionless, but they were closer now. The figure hadn't been there just a second ago. I didn't stop. Couldn't. I floored the gas pedal, the car surging forward, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. I had to get out of there. I couldn't deal with whatever was happening. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath shallow and quick. Every instinct told me to drive faster, get as far away from that road as possible. The road seemed to go on forever, the fog swallowing the landscape whole. And still, no sign of another car, no sign of another soul in sight. Just me and that figure haunting my every thought. But as I reached the next town, as the lights of civilization finally came into view, I knew I had to stop. The adrenaline was too much. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I pulled into the first gas station I could find, hoping to calm down. I sat there for a long while, just breathing, trying to collect myself. I looked out at the storm, the rain falling harder than ever. I couldn't explain what had happened. Was I imagining things? Was I just exhausted from the drive? I didn't know. But what I did know was this. When I finally left the gas station to head home, I didn't take the back roads. I stayed on the highway. The familiar hum of the busy road was a small comfort, even if it meant I had to deal with more traffic. Whatever had been out there, whatever I had seen, I knew one thing for sure. I was never driving those back roads again. The clock read 10:47 p.m. when I finally left the office parking lot. I had been in a meeting that dragged on longer than it should have, and now the roads were nearly empty. The city, with its bright lights and buzzing energy, felt so far behind me as I began the long stretch of highway that led to my house. The night had grown colder, and rain had started to fall in heavy sheets, making the asphalt slick and reflective. I always hated driving late at night. I don't know why. Maybe it was the quiet, the lack of other cars, or the feeling of being completely isolated in the world. Tonight, it felt even worse than usual. The windshield wipers slapped rhythmically, pushing the rain away from my view, but I still had trouble seeing clearly. The streetlights on the highway were sparse, and the road ahead seemed to melt into the blackness. My headlights barely cut through the thick fog and rain that enveloped everything. I'd driven this route home 100 times before. It was a quiet, rural stretch of highway that cut through dense woods, then curved through a small town before leading back out into more open land. Normally, I wouldn't think twice about it, but tonight, there was something unsettling about the way the fog hung low, like a suffocating blanket, and the way the trees on either side of the road loomed larger than usual, their bare branches twisting into the night sky. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the exhaustion that had settled deep into my bones. My car was an old sedan, nothing special. The dashboard lights blinked faintly as I drove, and the sound of the tires hitting the wet pavement was the only thing I could hear, aside from the occasional gust of wind that made the trees creak. I was just passing a small stretch of forest when I noticed something strange in the rearview mirror. A pair of headlights appeared far behind me, weaving in and out of my line of sight. At first, I thought it was another car catching up to me, but the movement was off. It wasn't a smooth approach. The car seemed to be swerving slightly, not in a way that suggested it was a drunk driver or anything, but just erratic. I felt a small pang of unease. Could just be a car going slower than me, but the way the headlights danced in the mirror made it look like the vehicle was struggling to stay on the road. I glanced at the speedometer, 70 miles per hour, and then checked the mirror again. The car was still there, far back, but the headlights were coming closer. I told myself to relax. It was probably nothing. There were no other cars on the road for miles. But the closer it got, the more uncomfortable I became. Something about the way it moved just didn't seem right. I was a good 10 miles from the nearest town, and there was no reason for a car to be out here at this hour. I checked the rearview mirror again. The headlights were much closer now, and I could make out the shape of a dark vehicle. But there was something off about the way the car was traveling. It wasn't a normal steady approach. It was almost like it was weaving, drifting toward the shoulder, then back toward the middle of the road, then back to the shoulder again. I couldn't help but speed up. I wasn't sure why, but my heart began to race. It was irrational. The car was still a good distance behind, but the idea that someone was out here in the middle of nowhere, driving like that, started to make me feel trapped. The rain came down heavier, and the fog only thickened. I pushed my foot down on the gas pedal, trying to put more distance between me and whatever was behind me. But it didn't help. The headlights didn't back off. I glanced to my left, then to my right. The road was still open. The forest on either side was thick, dark, and unwelcoming. There was nowhere to pull off and nowhere to hide. The headlights kept closing in, and my hands gripped the wheel tighter, my palms slick with sweat. I tried to shake off the fear, but it stuck to me like a wet blanket. There was no reason to be afraid, right? No reason at all. It was just another driver on a lonely road, and maybe they were having trouble in the rain just like I was. I blinked hard, trying to push away the anxiety that was creeping up on me. A sudden gust of wind hit the car, shaking it slightly. I flinched, and in that moment, I saw it. The other car swerved toward me, just slightly, too close. My heart skipped. Was it intentional? Couldn't tell. My instincts screamed at me to accelerate, to get away, but I was already going too fast. There was no space to move off the road. I turned my attention back to the road, my eyes scanning ahead. That's when I saw something else, something even more unnerving. A figure standing at the edge of the trees, right off the shoulder of the road. They were tall, drenched, but not moving, just standing there, facing my direction. I blinked again, but they didn't move. Was it a person? It didn't make sense. Who would be out here, standing alone in the middle of a storm? I felt my pulse quicken. My instincts screamed at me again. Get out of there. I wasn't sure if I was imagining things or if it was a trick of the rain and fog, but the figure didn't budge. Not even when my headlights hit them. They just stood there as still as a statue, watching. I glanced in the rearview mirror again. The headlights were right there now, too close. They were no longer swerving. They were directly behind me, too close. My breathing was ragged now, my hands trembling as I fought to keep the car on the road. The figure was still there, and now the car was so close I could see the shadow of the vehicle through the rain. But still no sign of a driver, no movement. I slammed my foot down on the gas. The car lurched forward, speeding even faster now. The headlights in the mirror flickered, as if the car behind me was accelerating to keep up, matching my speed. My mind raced. There had to be something wrong. Why wasn't it passing? Why was it sticking so close? Why had that figure been standing there, watching me? The rain began to fall harder. The world outside the car seemed to blur, just a wash of gray. The figure was gone from the edge of the road now. I couldn't see them anymore, and the car behind me, it was still there, always there, but I didn't dare look again. Couldn't. I hit a stretch of road that curved sharply ahead. There was a narrow bridge up ahead, one of those old wooden ones, barely wide enough for two cars to pass side by side. I had to make a decision, keep going or try to pull over and let the other car pass. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror one more time, the car was there, right on top of me. I couldn't see the headlights clearly anymore. The rain had reduced visibility to almost nothing, and I couldn't make out the shape of the vehicle at all. But it was too close, too close. The bridge came into view. The car behind me still hadn't passed. And then something changed. There was a loud honk, a single long piercing sound that made me flinch. I gripped the wheel harder. The car behind me was right on my tail. Too close. I had no choice but to drive faster to race toward the bridge. I made it to the bridge. Just as I did, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The headlights were gone. There was nothing behind me, just the rain, the fog, and the road ahead. No car, no headlights, just me. I let out a shaky breath, trying to steady my hands. What had just happened? Who had been following me? Why did they disappear the moment I reached the bridge? I didn't stop. Couldn't. I just kept driving, faster now, heart racing, trying to put the whole thing behind me. But the strange sensation didn't leave. Clung to me, deep in my gut. I didn't stop driving until I got to the next town. When I finally reached the lights and the bustling streets, I pulled into a gas station. I sat there for a few minutes, just breathing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But I couldn't. I didn't know if I had been imagining the whole thing. Maybe it was the exhaustion, the rain, or the storm playing tricks on me. But I didn't care. I wasn't going to drive those back roads again. Not for a long time. And for the rest of the drive home, I stayed on the main roads, surrounded by lights, people, and the hum of the city. I never looked back, and I never saw that car again. I don't know exactly why I chose to drive that night. Maybe it was because I couldn't sleep. Maybe it was because I needed to clear my head after a long week. Either way, I found myself on a stretch of highway that I didn't usually take. I was headed home, but the night had already started to weigh on me. The kind of night where the darkness seems to press in, and you can't shake the feeling that something's wrong. The kind of night when the rain comes out of nowhere. The drive had started out normal enough. I had left the city behind me, the hum of the cars and the blaring city lights giving way to the quiet, empty roads that made up the outskirts of town. I'd driven this route before, countless times, but tonight it felt different. The road seemed more isolated than usual. The trees on either side were heavier, darker, their branches tangled in the light rain, making the road ahead feel almost like a tunnel. I didn't think much of it at first. I was tired, no, exhausted really, and just wanted to get home. The radio was off, and all I could hear was the soft swish of the windshield wipers, the tires rolling over wet pavement, and the occasional gust of wind that made the trees shake. The rain wasn't heavy, but it wasn't light either. Just enough to make the world outside blurry, the headlights from my car barely cutting through the fog. As I passed the usual landmarks, an old diner, a small gas station that was never open, I noticed something odd. There were no other cars. Normally, the highway had a few stragglers, drivers like me coming or going, but tonight the road felt empty. I wasn't entirely surprised. It was past midnight, and most people were home in bed. But the longer I drove, the more I began to notice how alone I really was. I checked my phone. No signal. It wasn't unusual. This stretch of road was known for having bad reception. I put the phone back down, focusing on the road again. And that's when I saw it. A car. In the distance. I had been driving for about 20 minutes without seeing another vehicle, so when I saw the headlights, I felt a brief sense of relief. The car was far ahead, but the headlights were bright, cutting through the mist. It didn't seem unusual at first, but as I drew closer, I noticed something. The car was moving slowly, too slowly. I didn't think much of it. The car was probably some tired driver just like me, trying to make it home. I decided to pass it, but as I drew closer, something strange happened. The car didn't seem to move at all. The headlights stayed steady, but the car didn't seem to be making any progress down the road. It was like the driver had stopped, but there was no reason for it. I slowed down, curious but also cautious. The road was narrow here, barely wide enough for two cars to pass. It was a sharp bend ahead, and the fog made it impossible to see what was beyond. I didn't want to risk being stuck behind this car if something went wrong, so I honked once, just a short beep to see if it would move. Nothing happened. I inched closer, but the car didn't budge. It was like the driver was waiting for something, or maybe it was broken down. It was hard to tell, especially with the fog closing in. I leaned forward in my seat, trying to see past the mist. Finally, I did what any rational person would do. I pulled up behind the car, slowed down, and then shifted into the other lane, preparing to pass. But just as I was about to make my move, the car jerked to life. The engine roared to life, the headlights blinding me for a moment, and it sped up, quickly gaining on me. I could feel my heart race as I pressed the gas pedal, trying to get ahead, but the car was fast, too fast. It didn't pass me like I expected. Instead, it stayed right on my tail, tailgating me as though it was deliberately trying to push me forward. Couldn't believe it. Why was it following me? There was plenty of road, yet it stayed close behind. I could feel the weight of its presence, the tension growing in my chest. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the headlights were blinding. I couldn't make out anything other than the glaring lights behind me. I tried to speed up, but the car was right there, not tailgating, but staying in line with me, as if it was purposely matching my speed. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't pull over. There was nowhere to stop, and the rain was making the road slick and dangerous. I glanced ahead again, hoping to see an intersection or an exit, something that could give me a reason to get off this road. But there was nothing, just the endless stretch of highway and the forest on either side. I tried to stay calm. It had to be a coincidence, right? Maybe the other driver was just as lost or tired as I was. Maybe they weren't following me at all. But then the headlights blinked. Once, twice. It was a signal, some kind of message. My stomach dropped. I didn't know if it was intentional or if I was just imagining things, but my gut told me something was wrong. I sped up again. This time, I wasn't going to be slowed down. The car behind me, however, didn't waver. Stayed right there. My hands tightened on the wheel, and I could feel my breath quicken. The fog had thickened, and I realized I couldn't see more than a few yards in front of me. The headlights behind me were so close now that they almost seemed to block my view entirely. I couldn't make out the shape of the car, the distance between us, or anything. It was like I was being swallowed by the night. That's when I noticed something else. The car wasn't just matching my speed. It was getting closer, slowly at first, then faster until it was practically on my bumper. I could feel the pressure, the weight of it pushing me forward, but I had nowhere to go. I couldn't see anything ahead. The road curved sharply to the left, and I couldn't make out the lane lines through the thick fog and rain. I had no choice. I swerved into the opposite lane, hoping to get a little distance between us. But then, the car did something that made my blood run cold. It followed. It swerved into the opposite lane, too, staying right beside me. I could barely make out the shape of the car now. It wasn't just close. It was right next to me, so close that I could see the outlines of the windows, the dark shape of the vehicle, but no driver. No reflection in the mirror, just empty, black windows. Panic clawed at my throat, and I hit the gas, speeding forward as fast as I could. The car followed, never giving me a break. The rain had started to fall harder, and my heart was racing as I swerved again, trying to get away. But the car stayed there, close, just as close as before. I didn't know how much longer I could keep this up. I was going too fast, the road was too narrow, and the fog was suffocating. I had to get off this road. I had to get away from this car. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the headlights vanished. One moment, the car was there, so close I could almost feel its presence in the air, and the next, it was gone. Just like that. I didn't hesitate. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as I swerved off the road and onto the gravel shoulder. I stopped the car, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what had just happened. I didn't know if I had imagined the whole thing or if something else was at play. But in that moment, I knew I couldn't keep going. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of the events that had just unfolded. But the road was silent. The fog rolled in like a thick wall, and the rain continued to pour, but there was no sign of the car, no sign of anything that had been following me. Eventually, I got out of the car, my legs shaky as I stood by the side of the road, trying to shake off the lingering sense of dread. There was no one around, no other vehicles, no other headlights, just the empty road. I waited a moment longer, then slowly got back in my car, my hands still trembling. I turned the engine back on, my heart still racing, and drove cautiously, slowly, toward the next town. I never saw the car again, and I never took that road again. I didn't even think about it when I took the turn. I had driven this road before, maybe twice, and I was tired. My brain wasn't working at full speed, and I wasn't paying attention like I should have been. The turn looked familiar, and my gut told me it was the right one. It wasn't. I was coming back from my friend's place, 3 hours out of town. It was late, past midnight, and I was drained from the long day. I had already been on the road for over an hour, and I just wanted to get home. The drive had been smooth up until then, mostly empty highways, nothing unusual, nothing weird. Just the sound of my tires rolling against the asphalt, the low hum of the engine, and the occasional flicker of headlights from distant cars on the main road. I hadn't seen another car in a while when I took that turn. It was supposed to be a shortcut, or at least I thought it was. My phone's GPS had lost service about 10 miles back, but I wasn't worried. I had a general idea of where I was going, and besides, the road felt familiar enough. But within a few minutes, I started to notice things felt off. At first, it was subtle. The road was narrower than I remembered. The trees on either side seemed thicker, taller, leaning over the road like they were closing in. The asphalt wasn't as smooth either. It had cracks, patches of gravel in spots where the pavement had worn away. My headlights bounced over them, making strange, shifting shadows in the trees. I kept driving, telling myself I was just tired, that my mind was exaggerating things. But then I noticed the lack of signs. No speed limit signs, no mile markers, no turnoffs. Just endless road, stretching ahead into the dark. A thin layer of fog clung to the ground, swirling in my headlights. The temperature had dropped, too. I glanced at the dashboard, 48 degrees. It had been in the low 60s just a few minutes ago. Still, I told myself it was fine. I'd just keep going. The road had to lead somewhere. Then I saw the first car. It was pulled off to the side, barely visible in the dark. My headlights caught the back of it. A black sedan, dusty, like it had been sitting there for a while. There was no movement inside, no lights on, just a parked car in the middle of nowhere. Something about it made me uneasy. I slowed down a little, gripping the wheel tighter as I passed. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights flick on. The car pulling out behind me. Nothing, just darkness. The road stretched on, winding deeper into the trees. I was starting to regret taking this turn. The farther I went, the worse the road got. More cracks, more gravel. The trees on either side grew denser, and the fog thickened, creeping higher, swirling like smoke. Then I saw another car. Same situation. Pulled over to the side, dark, empty. This one was an old pickup, covered in dirt, its windows rolled up, its front tires turned slightly, like someone had pulled off in a hurry. I passed it, my stomach twisting. 2 abandoned cars, no houses, no turnoffs, no signs of life. Just an empty road in the middle of nowhere. I checked my phone again. No service. I pressed the gas a little harder. The road twisted and turned, the fog growing so thick that my high beams barely cut through it. I was gripping the steering wheel so tight my fingers ached. Then I saw the third car. It was facing me. My headlights washed over it. A silver sedan parked at an angle partially in my lane. The driver's side door was open. I slowed to a crawl, my heart pounding. My eyes darted over the car, searching for any sign of movement. The interior was dark, empty. The car had been sitting for a while. The windshield was covered in a thin layer of dirt and dead leaves. No signs of an accident. No skid marks, no broken glass. Just abandoned. I had 2 choices. I could turn around and drive back the way I came, past those other cars, back toward the highway. Or I could keep going forward, hoping this road eventually led somewhere. I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to sit there in the dark, with nothing but the fog and those empty cars around me. I took a deep breath and drove around the sedan, hugging the edge of the road, my tires crunching over loose gravel. As soon as I passed, my headlights hit something else. Footprints, leading away from the car. I didn't stop to think. I just kept driving. The road seemed to go on forever. The fog was suffocating now, thick and heavy, pressing against the windows. I couldn't see more than a few yards ahead. The trees were closing in, their branches reaching toward the road like twisted arms. Then, up ahead, something moved. A shadow, person, standing in the middle of the road. My heart nearly stopped. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding on the gravel. My headlights lit them up, just a silhouette, motionless, facing my car. I couldn't see their face, couldn't see any details, just the shape of a person standing there, feet planted, arms at their sides. I didn't move, neither did they. For a long moment, we just sat there, me in my car, engine humming, headlights cutting through the fog, and them standing in the road, staring. Then they took a step forward. I threw the car into reverse and hit the gas. The tires spun, kicking up gravel as I flew backward, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't care about the road anymore. I didn't care where it led. I just knew I had to get away. As I backed up, my headlights swung over the trees, over the fog, over something else. More figures, standing along the roadside, motionless, watching, my breath caught in my throat. I could barely see them, just dark shapes in the mist. 5, maybe 6 of them, spaced out along the trees, unmoving. I didn't stop. I kept reversing, faster now, my tires skidding. Then I saw movement. One of the figures, started walking toward the road. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I spun the wheel, turning the car around, and floored it. The road blurred past me. The fog swallowed everything behind me. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't check to see if they were following. I just drove. I don't know how long it took, but eventually, I saw a light, a road sign, a real road sign. I hit the main highway doing nearly 80, tires screeching as I merged onto the open road. I drove straight home, didn't stop, didn't look back. When I checked my phone an hour later, I had service again. I looked up that road. It didn't exist, at least not on any map. I don't know where I was that night. I don't know what I saw, but I never took another shortcut again. And I never drove alone that late at night ever again. I knew I should have left earlier. It was already late when I got in the car. A 4-hour drive back home, and I had let time slip away, convincing myself I could afford to stay just a little longer. One more drink, one more story with old friends. But time doesn't stop, and now I was paying for it. By the time I finally got on the road, it was almost midnight. I wasn't worried at first. I had done late-night drives before. I had a full tank of gas, coffee in the cup holder, and music playing just loud enough to keep my brain engaged. The first hour was easy. The highway stretched out ahead, mostly empty, just a few other cars passing by every now and then. The soft glow of my dashboard lights and the rhythmic sound of the tires against the road were almost soothing. Then I saw the detour sign. It was bright orange, reflective, standing out clearly against the darkness. Road closed, detour ahead. I sighed. I hadn't expected that. My GPS hadn't warned me, and I had driven this route before with no problems. But construction happens. Road's close. No big deal. The detour sign pointed to an exit ramp I had never taken before. The road looked smaller, older, with no streetlights beyond the turn. But I figured it would loop back to the main highway soon enough. I took the exit. The road started out fine. A 2-lane stretch of pavement cutting through fields and patches of trees. It was darker, quieter, but nothing out of the ordinary. I kept driving, waiting for the GPS to adjust and guide me back to the highway. Then I lost service. I glanced at my phone. No bars, no data, just searching for signal. That was annoying, but not a big deal. I still had the road. I still had gas. I figured I'd just follow the detour signs until I got back on track. But after 15 minutes, I realized there were no more signs. The road had narrowed slightly, the edges crumbling into gravel. I hadn't seen another car since I left the highway. No intersections, no turns, no streetlights. Just an empty road stretching into the night. My headlights felt weaker somehow, barely cutting through the thick darkness. The trees on either side seemed taller, pressing in, their branches hanging low. The further I drove, the more I noticed the details. how the pavement was cracked and uneven, how the faded lines on the road barely existed anymore. This wasn't a detour. This was just an old road, and I had no idea where it led. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. I told myself to stay calm. Worst case, I turn around. But then I saw the first car. It was pulled off to the side, barely visible until my headlights swept over it. An old sedan, coated in dust, its windows dark. Something about it felt wrong. Maybe it was the way it was parked, angled slightly, like someone had stopped in a hurry. Maybe it was the thick layer of grime, like it had been sitting there for too long. I slowed down slightly, glancing at it as I passed. The driver's side door was open. No movement, no lights, just an abandoned car in the middle of nowhere. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I pressed the gas a little harder. A mile later, I saw the second one. Another car pulled off to the side. This one was an old pickup, its tires half deflated, its windshield cracked. The hood was slightly open, but no one was around. No footprints, no signs of life, just another empty, forgotten vehicle. My stomach tightened. This was wrong. I should have turned around. But I kept telling myself that I had already driven this far, and the road had to lead somewhere. Then I saw the third one. It was facing me, a silver sedan, parked at an angle halfway in my lane. I hit the brakes hard, my tires skidding slightly on the rough pavement. My headlights washed over the car, revealing its open driver's side door. The inside was empty. I sat there, gripping the wheel, my pulse hammering. Something wasn't right. I checked my rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. No other cars, no turnoffs, just miles of cracked pavement disappearing into darkness. I had to make a choice. I could turn around, drive past those other abandoned cars, and hope I found my way back. Or I could keep going, hoping this road eventually led somewhere. I didn't want to sit there any longer. I eased the car forward, steering carefully around the silver sedan, my hands so tight on the wheel they ached. As I passed, my headlights swept over something. Footprints, leading away from the car, not toward the trees, toward the road, toward me. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed the gas harder. The road got worse, uneven, littered with debris. The trees pressed in closer, their branches scraping against the sides of my car. The fog was thick now, swirling at the edges of my high beams. Then up ahead, movement, a figure, standing in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes, my heart pounding. My headlights hit them fully. A man, dressed in dark clothing, standing completely still, not waving for help, not moving at all, just standing there, blocking the road. I didn't think. I threw the car into reverse, my tires spinning as I backed up fast. The figure didn't move. Then, in my rearview mirror, another one. Behind me, standing in the road. No expression, no reaction, just there. I yanked the wheel, cutting hard to the side, my tires skidding on loose gravel as I pulled off the road. I didn't care if I wrecked the suspension. I just needed to get out. Branches scraped against my windows as I forced the car through a narrow strip of clearing beside the road. My heart hammered as I jolted over uneven ground, my tires kicking up dirt. I didn't look at them again. I just drove. I don't know how long I kept going before I saw the lights. A gas station. A real, open gas station. Its bright fluorescent glow cutting through the night. I pulled in too fast, my tires screeching. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely put the car in park. I sat there, breathing hard, my pulse still pounding in my ears. I checked my phone. Service. I had no idea where I was. I had no idea where that road had led. I tried looking for it later, checked maps, even drove back toward where I thought I had taken the detour. I never found it again. But I know what I saw, and I will never take another unknown road at night.